Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seize Your Day. So, I know we've always heard the phrase talk to the animals based on Dr. Doolittle, but I have a real live Dr. Doolittle with me as my very special guest. And I'm also proud to call her a friend. Joan Ranquet has connected with animals professionally for over 25 years and personally for much longer. She has founded Communication with All Life University, which is a certification program for animal communicators and energy healers. She's also the author of Communication with All Life, Energy Healing for Animals, and a contributor to Dharma for Dogs and Karma for Cats. Or Dharma of Dogs, Karma of Cats. I love those titles. Her latest book is EFT for Animals and Their Humans, and she lives on a farm in Southern California with her animal family. And we're going to find out it's 3 horses, 3 dogs, and 3 cats. I'll make sure that's accurate, but I just want to show her newest book, and we're definitely going to talk about that as well. So, welcome, Joan. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's been so long, and we've tried this once before, and there was some challenges. But what I like about doing this now that we can actually physically see you and we all of your beautiful stories and your beautiful books. So your latest book is really interesting. I'm familiar with the whole tapping method when you do it on a human. I've practiced that myself. So how do you find something like this? Well, first of all, why don't you tell everybody what EFT is and what your success has been with animals?
Okay, so EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, is a healing modality that is pretty scientifically based, and there's lots of science around it for humans. And so it's tapping on acupressure points, and each of these points are connected to meridians, and each of those meridians are connected to organ systems, and each of those organ systems in traditional Chinese medicine are believed to be connected to emotions. And so what we're doing is dealing with a challenging emotion, situation, or relationship, and tapping on what are called feel good points while we're telling that story. And ultimately, we bring down the charge on that particular emotion, if that makes sense.
Yes, I'm like I said, I am familiar with it as far as human beings go. But as we discuss the fact that you're able to communicate with the animals and you also help other people do that, before you're doing this technique, what is your process? Do you more or less talk to the animals and find out what the issues are, or how does the process work?
Well, it's that's the great way to do it is to be able to communicate with the animal and find out what happened and why they're afraid or why they're mad or why they're sad. But in the book, I actually also have a copy right here. Um, I have lots of, I have all the, I have what I would call kind of sample scripts. So people can ask themselves, what's going on. Like, for example, yesterday I worked with 2 different dogs in 2 different homes. And I do it on the phone, and all my students know how to do it on Zoom or the phone or in person. But if I have a chance to go in person, I do. So yesterday, the first situation was there was a young man who's disabled, and his emotional support dog, is afraid of some of his caregivers. And so when I communicated with the dog, I found out that there had been an incident with one of the caregivers that had scared her. And so from that moment, so we tapped on that. We tapped on that particular incident because that's what was, up for the dog. And then the person had told me that, yeah, since that incident, the dog had been more and more shut down. So we'll see. I'm going to go over and tap with that dog while the caregivers are there next week. So it's an unraveling process. It's not always immediate, although I do have some great stories of instant transformation. And so then the next dog I went to, I'd already communicated with it. And so I simply asked the person, what is it that the dog, what are the situations where the dog is fearful? And she said, men, and named a number of things. So it wasn't a giant communication with the dog. It was more a asking the human, what she experiences. So I tapped on both her fear of the dog being so scared it might nip, and then I tapped with the dog about the fearful situations, but ending with trusting her human, or his human. Does that
I
make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And I think it's just fascinating. And one of the things that I like that you said was the fact that you can do it with Zoom, you can do it over the phone, because I
Mhm.
think it is so much about energy. And sometimes people feel, well, you need to be doing healing work of any kind and in person. And as you're pointing out, that is not at all necessary. So, what made you decide to try the tapping? Was it that you found success with it yourself, or how did you stumble on this, so to speak?
Yeah, I was living in Denver at the time, and I was married, and I my then husband and I had a terrible incident, and I wasn't able to sleep, and we were victims of a crime, and so I could not sleep to save my life, and I went to a hypnotist, and the guy said, um, "I've learned this new technique." This was like 2002. I've just learned this technique called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, and I'd really like to try it on you rather than hypnotize you, because I'm finding it to be more effective. And so I thought, all right, I'll try it. And I was able to sleep. And I thought, that's crazy. So I started taking classes, and I got certified in it, because what I thought originally, I didn't think to tap on an animal. So I'm living in Denver, and I would, this is early 2000s. I had a ton of clients still in Seattle and LA. And a number of them, there were two kind of themes. One was people had dogs that were biting other, dogs or people. So I don't like to use the term aggression, but perhaps reactivity. So, and what happens with the person is, let's say you have the dog that's reactive, you walk outside your door and you tense up. So the tension is on the leash. So the dog is picking up on your fear. And now the dog is like, well, they're no leader. I better take over. And so I thought, if I could help the person not be so fearful, that's going to change. And then the other thing that I had was, I had a lot of clients who had been either bucked off their horse, or there was a terrible accident, and they were afraid to get back on their horse. And so I thought, that's another one where if I could help the person be less fearful, they could have that experience with their horse that they're dying to have. So those were the two things that made me get certified in EFT. And then there wasn't really anybody doing it for animals. So when I was writing my second book, Energy Healing for Animals, I thought, I wanted to find if there was anybody out there that was leading the charge on animal EFT, and there wasn't anybody. So I thought, there's a spot for me. But I had tried it in 2004. I tried it on a horse, because there was nothing I could do. I was living in Florida at this point, and 2005, and I was at a horse show. Well, I wasn't there. My client was a horse trainer, and he called me and he said, this mutual client of ours was at the horse show, and this big giant horse named Shakespeare was starting to go after ponies, and with his big jaws going after ponies, and he was terrifying everybody in the arena. And so I drove out to the showgrounds, and I saw it firsthand, and I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna try it. I told the client and the horse trainer. I said, we're going to go down to this barn aisle where we aren't going to see anybody. We're going to do something really weird. And fortunately, I knew acupressure, so I knew where the points would be relatively the same, and they were, and it worked. The horse was what didn't go after ponies anymore, and eventually retired with a pony. So
Wow, that's an amazing story. And I'm assuming your book gives people the tools so that they're able to do this process themselves.
absolutely, that I want everybody out there tapping, you
Yeah.
know, because there's not enough of us to help all the problems in the world. So, there are certain situations that are definitely a do-it-yourself. And if you can't do it, at least at least you understand the process in the book. And I have so many stories in there, and so many kind of really a breakdown of behavior in a way that I don't that a lot of veterinarians, when they read the book, are like, wow, that's so simplified and excellent. And you can really see your own part in it, and then how to help the animal. But
Yeah.
I teach EFT. I have digital classes, longer classes, and then I also, I have students who need case studies. So I always say that, like, if you can't afford it, just write to us, because we'll get you somebody for free. We need peace in our households, because it leads to global peace.
That's very true. And I think that what's so interesting about all of this is so many people now are opting to have pets versus children. I think that the whole thing, it's very interesting because my daughter's got a French bulldog and
Hmm.
she's a cancer survivor. And because of her disease, she isn't able to have children. So this little bulldog is now her son. It's like her whole life. And there's so many times, and I've talked to her about it, really, because they're traveling right now. She's living the nomad life with him. So his name is Louis Vuitton, and he's in a backpack all the time. She takes him everywhere. They're inseparable. But there are times that he does things that she just doesn't understand. And I think it would be so beneficial to be able to communicate or to put them at ease. When he first started this traveling in the RV, he was nervous, he was this, he was that. So again, I'm sure that something like this
Oh
would
yeah.
be so beneficial. So I will definitely tell her about it. And again, I think so many people, again, in this do it yourself world, because I think for people that have got pets, they want to do whatever they can to help their pets. So to be able to do it themselves, that's really a phenomenal talent.
Well, and the truth is, it, you may end up needing help, but you trying it at first is going to deepen the bond. It's going to give you a bigger understanding, because just filling out the forms in here of, like, looking at from the dog's perspective, why would I be nervous in an RV? Well, it's loud, it's out of control, right? All of a sudden you start writing in all these things, and you're like, oh, it's going to give you bigger insight and compassion for what your animal's going through.
Yeah, and I think that's key. In the introduction, I said that you have said that you've been able to do this well before you put a title on it as an animal communicator. So how did it all begin for you?
Well, I grew up, I always say that I was raised as a small lap dog. There's not a single picture of me as a baby that I'm not on my dad's lap. I mean, there's nothing of just me and my dad. It's me and my dad and the dog. So anyway, I I grew up just crazy, horse crazy, and I won my first horse at 7, and then my parents told me I couldn't keep that horse. So after 6 months, I had to let that horse go, which is, I mean, still, like, when I'm tapping or in therapy, that's the original wound, I think. Anyway, um, I ended up getting, my parents made a promise that I could have horses if I went and learned about them. And so, of course, I mean, I was child labor, but I was down at the barn doing whatever I could to learn about horses. And in a barn in the neighborhood. So I kind of worked at this Arab farm at like 10. And so my parents did get me a horse, and then my sisters, they knew they were in for it. So they ended up buying a piece of property, and we went from like 0 to 10 horses in a minute. And so that was just our world from like 9. At 9 I was at that Arab farm, but then we had our own place when I was 10, and we built our barn. And it was even when I went to college and I got a degree in theater, I went to a college with an equestrian team. So I just was that horse crazy person. And it paid off, because I what I was always really connected to them. And it wasn't but I wouldn't have called it communication, because I think we somehow think that communication requires language, right? And so, but I was communicating with them because I was that kid that, if the neighbor needed to give their horse a shot, I was calm. I was able to do that thing that a lot of people didn't feel like they could do. And I really loved that quiet world with them. So then years later, I ended up getting my sister. So I lived in New York City, and my sister was diagnosed with a brain tumor. So I moved back to Seattle. And my sister died, and it was just a real awakening about, life and the things I wanted. So I moved to Los Angeles. I had that degree in theater, so I'd been in New York and then LA. Um, and one of the first things I did was I got a horse, and um, she really helped me through my grief. And then eventually I lost her. But in that time, in the late 80s, I started using an animal communicator, and everybody thought I was crazy at first. But they'd hear the stories, and the next thing you know, they're like, well, when she comes back, I want to do it too. So I used this woman named Lydia Hibby over and over. And I would ask her, I'd say, how do you do this? She said, oh, you're already doing it. And I didn't necessarily believe her. So eventually I lost that horse, my soulmate horse, who was a lot like your daughter's dog, Louis Vuitton. Um, so I lost Pet One, and in that time I had another horse, and this horse had some challenges. And so I ended up trying to find the animal communicator's phone number. I couldn't find it, but like literally my life works like this, like get divorced, but get a Hay House book deal. But anyway, it's always within 24 hours. Like if something terrible happens, I'm like, oh, but look over here. So anyway, I was desperate to get to the bottom of the situation with my horse. Could not find that animal communicator's phone number to save my life. Back then it was slips of paper. We weren't, with these devices. So I found out 24 hours later that there was a class on animal communication with a different animal communicator. So I signed up for that class, and, the rest is kind of history. I mean, I ended up taking the year-long program with Carol Gurney, but it I still thought I was going to be an actress and a screenwriter, and that I was just doing this for myself. But I ended up, you know, in the early 90s, telling people that you were talking to animals was like lighting hay on fire. Everybody, living in Los Angeles, everybody wanted you to come over and talk to their dog, to their horse, to their cat. So I was busy, and I finally started having to charge money for it. So that's
Yeah.
how.
That's just amazing that the way things become so organic that we think that we're going to be on a specific path and then things just
Yeah,
take a turn. And again, your Hay House book came out in what year?
2007.
2007. And that was the Energy Healing for Animals book,
That was
correct?
communication with all life.
Okay.
The
Oh,
energy thing was with sounds true.
okay, okay. So that was like your first foray into publishing. And I know you and I have discussed it that as much as on one level it was a dream come true, on the other level, you realize all that's involved, that the writing and everything is fun compared to the marketing and everything else that you have to
Absolutely.
do to get
Yeah.
the book out there. So it's just, I think especially like you said, when you talk about these things, just like in the beginning, talking about angels, intuition, things like that, it was so like people looked at you like you were crazy. But now it's a viable option for many people focusing on their own intuition, focusing on energy healing. Now, when you do energy healing and not the tapping, is there a specific technique that you use? Do you use Reiki, or what is
I,
it that you use?
I use something called the scalar wave, and it was a technique created by Dr. Valerie Hunt. And with that, she really taught, she was a scientist that didn't believe in any of this. And at UCLA, she was a professor there, and they asked her um, to define and prove that there was an aura. And so she went to prove that there was not an aura, but discovered there is an aura, and it opened the door for her, and she became like the biggest convert. And through her studies of like psychic surgery in the Philippines and things like that, she created a very kind of hands-on technique that's all kind of driven by breath and intention and working on a cellular level. And it's beautiful, and it's something I do it every day before I start my meditation. I do a little quick version. But when I'm working with clients and their animals, that's the technique that I use, and it's what I teach. And my students have to do 65 case studies, so they're all like just blown away at what it can do.
Wow, that, and what's it called again?
Scalar wave.
Wow, see, and that's so interesting. I've never heard of that before. So again, just a different field. And that's what I say all the time on the podcast about how important it is to just use what resonates with you. That for some people, a certain technique works, for somebody else, it's a different technique. So I know now you're doing quite a bit of traveling and you're taking groups, especially to Africa. I don't know what happened. I remember we were supposed to do that dolphin swim together in Bimini, and I don't know what happened that we didn't end up doing it. But I know that I believe is where you started. And the photos and things like that from that trip were just amazing. So, what is it that really made you decide to take groups to different places like this? And tell us a little bit about the trips you've taken and the ones that you have coming up.
Okay. Well, first of all, and I will say there's two things that, like, if I were to think about them, I can't sleep at night, right? And one is that the animals are being killed in the shelter. And so we have a whole tapping program. I wanted to share this real quick. A whole EFT tapping program with animals in the shelter that's been really successful. And so we're building that. And then the other thing that makes me not sleep is to think about endangered species going away, right? Like how could we live on a planet, share a planet with certain species that may not be here if we don't do something about it? So I'm really driven to get people to see these animals in their own place and be able to share the animals. I mean, what I say is, like, if you come on a trip with me, now you're a new steward of these animals, and you're going to share stories, and you're going to get out there and be an advocate for animals that need a voice. So, and that sounds very serious, and the trips are very fun. So I started with dolphin trips, and I do have a dolphin trip this next June. Um, so I I started with dolphin trips in 2010, and again, it was one of those boohoo moments where it's like, oh, when I got divorced, my lifestyle was very different, and one of the things was my ex-husband had a boat in the British Virgin Islands, so I spent a lot of time in the blue water with turtles and stuff. And I'll never forget, I was sitting on the couch in Seattle, feeling sorry for myself. My dad had just died, and it was just pouring down rain. I remember I was miserable. And all of a sudden, this little click comes up on Facebook Messenger. It says, Hi, my name is Captain Jeff, and I have a dolphin trip. And we, used this one animal communicator, Penelope Smith, for years. And of course, I knew who Penelope was. And he said, "But I need somebody to host a week or two on the boat in June. Would you be interested?" And I was like, "What would I be interested?" He's like, "Can you talk?" And I'm like, "Call me now." And I ended up on the phone with him for 3 hours. And the next thing you know, I started doing dolphin trips. So I had the time of my life on those trips. I did 2 trips a year back to back. So I'd go for one, take one group. I'd have a few days off in Bimini. Gosh, what hell. And and I would usually end up in the water again, right? Like my day off, I would be like on a shark trip or whatever. And then I would do another week, and we would do these meditations. And I like to, what I noticed right away was that people were so excited to be with dolphins that first time that people got in the water, the dolphins would go away because we were so excited, right? And so I created meditations to get us quiet, to bring our energy field in, and to be able to be a non-threat. Because even if we think that, oh, I love dolphins more than anything in the world, we're sending out this energy, right? So I teach people how to bring their energy back so that we are a neutral, if not safe, um, species to be with them. And so that I started using those meditations with on the wildlife trips. And literally, I mean, I have videos of elephants coming up and their trunk doing this and that. And it's just so crazy how magnificent these creatures are, and how the encounters that we have where, the guides always say to me, "Joan, can you stay? Because I've never had this kind of an encounter before." So the guides always are like ready to hire me.
That's amazing. I thought I turned my phone off, so I apologize for that. Um, Yes, okay, so now I lose my train of thought. That was the Harry Potter theme. So talking about magic as we're talking about it, and so much of what you've done has been synchronistic, like you're saying, that you feel like, oh my gosh, what's my next step? And I think that speaks so much to being open to what our next step would be. And I've done quite a few podcasts on intuition, and I think your whole theory, or really what proved to be true, was when you were swimming with these animals, and I'm sure it's with any animals that you're going into their habitat, so to speak, that you make sure that everybody is calm, that it's meditative. And you started to talk about, yeah, you were putting your fingers out just when my phone rang. You were putting your fingers out with the elephant, just
Yeah.
reaching out, because I think I saw not that long ago, it could have been on Facebook, I'm not sure exactly where actually an elephant charged this Jeep, and somebody ended up getting killed. And I think we don't realize that when we're in their home, we have to be so respectful. And I'm sure that so many of these times you go to these places and they offer safaris and things like that, and the people aren't trained the way they should be, and you don't realize that you're putting yourself at risk, that you have to really be cognizant, like you said, of your energy, what you're putting out there. And we know animals are very energy sensitive. To your point about the dog leash, getting on a horse and how they feel. Yeah, I think it's really very important for people to remember that.
And so, and in there, I always say that emotion saves their life. If you're a gazelle and you feel fear, you're going to run, right? That just saved your life. So there's no good or bad emotions for animals. It's simply emotions. But when they see excitement, it can look like, so I'm excited to see the lions. It can look like nervousness, and that can become a threat. And so, um, I've been so close to lions where I like tried to get a closer picture, and it went like this. Oh, I went, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And I just sat back down. I said, noted, right? And I just sat back down and I still got unbelievable close up pictures because I'm 5 feet from the lion. And so, I get into relationship like that where it's like, I stepped out of, no, I'm so sorry, right? Like, I get it. And yeah,
So you mentioned that you have a couple trips coming up. The Bimini trip is coming up in June 2025, I'm assuming. And then
yeah.
what other trips do you have coming up?
So I have a trip to Tanzania and Kenya in November, and one of the magic, and then an add-on of Rwanda for the gorillas. And I mean, they are almost extinct. But what we have in Kenya that is just, before COVID I went, and then since then I've been to this place called a Tumba camp. If you've ever been on social media and seen the Sheldrick Trust where they have the orphan elephants that wear the blankets. So we go to the Sheldrick Trust, but we go one day to the nursery and we see the babies. And what happens is the progression for an orphaned elephant is they live at the nursery for the first like 4 years and 4 to 6 years, and they there are men that sleep with them because they're very social creatures, right? They would sleep in an elephant pile with other babies and mom and everything. So when they've lost their family, they create a new family, a new herd with all these other orphans, and they get assigned a person, and then they switch so they don't get too attached to that person. And then they get moved to one of 3 camps when they're about 6 to 14 years old. And eventually, what happens is they go on long walks every day. It's kind of the same walk. And they might encounter the wild elephants and they remember what it is to be in that herd, right? And so they walk by that herd and eventually they won't come back to camp. But so we spend 3 days at a Tumba camp where where we go first thing in the morning, see them have breakfast, and then they go out into the wild. We meet them at lunch where they have they're fed another bottle, and then they swim in the mud, and it's crazy. It's the most fun thing on the planet. And then they walk some more, and eventually, and they're learning to forage, so that they're not dependent on a bottle. And then eventually they come back to a Tumba camp, and are in for the night. And when they get older, there's one enclosure that they don't shut the door. And so they're free, and the wild herds come by. And so and this place is so magical that the wild herds actually, when an orphan goes out and becomes part of the herd, they will.
Okay, so for some reason, Joan, we just lost audio with you. Um, I don't know if that's on your end or my end. You didn't happen to hit the mute button by any chance, did you?
Mm-mm.
Okay, there, you're back.
Okay.
Okay. So the last we heard about it's magical and the herds going by, and so
Oh,
continue.
so the when they get older and they know the humans know that these elephants are very interested in going off with the wild herd, they have an enclosure that is never locked, right? So they could leave in the night. They could come for dinner and then leave and be with the herd. And then a lot of the orphans that eventually rehabilitate and are with the wild will come back and show their babies.
Oh,
And they also they've been known to bring wild elephants back who've been injured because they know that they
oh
can.
my gosh.
It's crazy. This
I,
place is so magical, and the accommodations are like, oh my god.
That's what I like to hear. I
Yeah.
like to hear good accommodations. It's funny because a couple years ago I went to Thailand and I was with a group and we vibrational sound therapy where we used brass bowls. Okay. And I was certified in that. So we went, and of course, I can't remember which elephant rescue place this was that we went. But what we would do is we'd go there and we'd play these bowls, and like for the
Awesome.
people that were for the elephants that were in labor, for the new baby elephants. Now these elephants, to the best of my knowledge, never left. They were like rescues from circuses, things like that. So many of them had really been abused, but it was just a phenomenal experience. And the gentleman, Jeff Howard, who created this vibrational sound therapy, he discovered how it worked with these elephants. And though they're just the most incredible creatures, and I know you're talking about the mud, that we each had an elephant for the day, right? So we were able, first we did the whole brushing where you're hitting it, so to speak, to get the dust off and everything, not hitting it, but I'm sure you know
Yes.
what brushing it, you know what I'm talking about. Then we were in this place that was so rocky, it was unbelievable, full of mud, to get them in there to take a bath. And just to see, like you said, they're just such incredible beasts. And were the Asian elephants. So these were not the African elephants. So the smaller ears and things like that. And they also had one of the gentlemen that would, more or less take care of just one specific elephant and bond with that elephant. So, anything like that. And like you're saying, with the idea that these amazing creatures, you briefly said that about the gorillas, that they will be extinct, how much they have to offer. I mean, that was when I was on that safari, and I'm just seeing like all of these different things. And for some reason, I know it sounds naive, I had always expected Africa to look like a jungle. And it doesn't,
Yeah.
not where I was. It's more like a savanna kind of thing and I would look at the trees, and everything about it was just so absolutely incredible. So I think people that can and are guided to do something like this, it's just such a life-changing, it's so life-changing, I think.
It is. And I really, what you were saying earlier about like the Jeep that got flipped, like I really vet my people, and I like to say that like the accommodate my trips are not cheap because I want us to be safe. I want us to be, I mean, it's largely women, that come on these trips. So how can a group of, women of a certain age travel together? And I really vet who we stay with, where we stay, and the operator I have over there that puts the trips together. And I did a tiger trip to India, and I'm putting together a snow leopard trip. So there's, I spend a lot of time. I always say that my porn is itineraries, right? Like I like sit up at night and just like look through itineraries and go, oh, that's cool. And then I start researching and creating relationships with people that I can trust. And our accommodations are what I would call um, rustic luxury,
Yeah.
right? And so they're nice, and you feel really taken care of.
I think everything that you're saying is so important to make sure that what you're doing is safe. And many people, again, they look at prices and they don't realize the bottom line as to more or less you're getting what you pay for, and to make sure that everything is extremely safe. Well, Joan, this has been fascinating. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone
I know.
by. Thank you so much. If people want to learn more about these trips, learn more about your books, things like that, I'm assuming they go to your website, which is your name, correct?
Yes, and I have also lots of, classes. We have because I'm a school, we have ongoing curriculum. You could take one class, you could be with me for 2 years, or just do a digital class to get your feet wet. So
You
Yeah,
offer so much. I mean, we have to have you on again. I have to have you on again when it's convenient for you. I was so lucky because a mutual friend had said she's going to be traveling soon, so August might be the month. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I have to definitely get her on before she starts traveling." And I just can't thank you enough. And just so everybody out there listening knows that all of these things, again, are things that resonate with you. Like Joan said, like maybe taking one class or becoming certified to go work with other animals, to take these trips. Just kind of, I believe so strongly in meditation and getting into that space in yourself and saying, okay, what is it that would make my heart sing? As
yeah.
Wayne Dyer always used to say. And I just think these services that you offer, and I was talking to Joan prior to us beginning and saying, I really don't enjoy long flights anymore. However, I think to go to Africa with you, I think magical. We'd have to put it in all caps because I just can't
Yeah.
imagine anything better. And the gorillas just fascinate me. So I would love to hear more about that. So we're going to have you back on. And I can't thank you enough for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
And anything else that you would like to say before we part? Did we touch on as much as we could in this time?
I think we did.
Okay, perfect. Well, Joan Ranquet, that's www.joan and it's ranquet.com. And this website will also be up around the podcast so you can see it. Find out all about her. And thank you, Joan, for joining me today.
Thank
And
you.
and I want to say thank you to everybody that is tuning in. And just remember that kindness is always the key, be it to animals, be it to other people. Kindness is always the key. And until we meet again, I want to say namaste. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful evening. Namaste, Joan. Thanks again.
Namaste. Thank you.